We're going to look now at examples of how organisations have taken the theme of cascading good governance and tried to apply it across the various regional structures of their organisations. So we've got guests from organisations that are at different stages of implementing these initiatives. So they're working towards identifying good practice, trying to achieve consistency across, what could be quite a broad range of organisations within a structure. So if I could invite now, I can't quite see them in my outline, Chris Pringle, Regional Manager for the FA, Aaron Coggan, Director of Participation from Archery GB, and Georgina Usher, Chief Executive of British Fencing. Just give them a clap while this comes. I'm going to try and stay in most people's chairs. It's all plumbed in down there, so I don't move that, otherwise I'll do the whole thing a mischief that we might not recover from. If we could just start off by asking each of you, please, if you would just briefly introduce your organisation, the regional structure that you have in place to give us a sense of the scale of what we're dealing with, and maybe a few comments around the regional initiative that you are looking to implement, and we will take the discussion from there. Aaron, if you could go first, please.
Yeah, sure, thanks. Aaron Coggan, Director of Participation at Archery GB, obviously governing body for archery across the country. Hopefully that gentleman's question wasn't related to archery. We are about 27,000 members strong, 800 clubs up and down the country. We're often seen as a bit of a hidden sport in terms of they put out their equipment, they pack away, so you don't often see archery clubs out there unless you're driving down a road at a particular time on a particular day. But they're out there, very passionate people. We're a membership organisation, so each member affiliates to their club and then they affiliate to their county, their region or their home nation, and then us as a governing body as well. What was the second part, sorry?
The nature of the project, the regional project that you're undertaking.
So when we developed our strategy a couple of years ago, one of the main strategic ambitions that we as an organisation and our board wanted to achieve was a structure review and a membership review. I've been in the organisation for 13 odd years, and right from the start it was always that perennial question of what do I get from my governing body affiliation? And we've tried to address that, and we've tried to turn that around and make sure people understand that. We are increasingly finding their voices saying, what do I get from my county affiliation? What do I get from my regional affiliation? So part of the project, or the main part of the project, is to look at that and make sure that there is consistency from what an archer in Kent gets out of the system to what an archer in the northwest of Scotland, etc. So our number one strategic ambition as part of our plan is looking at creating an effective and efficient governance and delivery structure.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. And Chris, and just before Chris starts, if you want extra detail around what he's about to say, we do have copies of his fairly recent essay on the regional or the county FA code initiative that the FA undertook. And he also spoke on one of our webinars recently. So if you want sort of chapter and verse on this, then that's the place to go for that. Chris, if you could tell us a little bit, please.
I'm not sure if that's a cue to keep it brief. You can read it elsewhere. So normally when I introduce myself as being from the FA, people start talking about the wonderful Lionesses, winning the Euros in the summer, or the World Cup game, or VAR. If I'm lucky, we might start talking about a Premier League fixture. But there's a whole host of grassroots football that sits below it, and that's the part that I'm involved in. Quick straw poll, anyone involved in grassroots football, either as a parent, player, coach, manager? Yeah, quite a few of you, which is great. So it's a pretty big sport, a pretty big undertaking at regional level. So with 1.5 million players, 22,000 clubs, 100,000 plus teams. So to govern and administer and develop that structure, we've got 50 brilliant county FAs. So they all work independently of the FA. They're based on a regional structure, which is pretty traditional. So we've really decided and looked at that structure and gone, how do we get the best out of it? How do we work well together? And really the code of governance at the regional levels being the tool to enable us to do that. So we introduced an operating model back in 2018, and the regional code came out of that piece of work. And it was something that the counties asked for. So it's great that we've got that in place. Progress to date, we've effectively got 7 of our 50 counties, the equivalent of Tier 3 Sport England's code, so like mini national governing bodies across the country. I'll share in a little while how we've got to that point, but a lot of work still to do. We should be about a third of the county structure, Tier 3 effectively compliant by the end of this season.
Thank you. Georgina, please.
Morning everybody, my name is Georgina Usher, I'm the Chief Executive of British Fencing, and British Fencing, we have about 10,000 members. I always think that's a tiny number, but a little stat around about 250,000 people every year try fencing in some environment or another. So there's a lot of hidden fences around the place and a lot of organisations involved in delivering that activity. As a national governing body, though, we are a membership organisation. The 10,000 members that join up through their membership with us also affiliate to a home nation, 6 home nations, one of which is England Fencing. And England Fencing has 10 regions. And we started this project primarily because we want to work better with the regional organisations on the ground. So we're a very small body. We don't have many staff, many people. We don't have regional development managers, so if we've got a project that we think would be perfect for the Northwest, who can we work with locally, who are the people up there, and how can we deliver? We want to make sure that the people that we are working with have the same kind of, and we talked about it, culture and values, because this is what it is about. It's not about have you got a tick box list of things you do well. Are you the kind of people that we can work with to deliver exceptional experiences on the ground to existing and new fencers?
Thank you. I think it's quite interesting that obviously a lot of people will be sort of looking at this now because it is a requirement in the code. But I think we've got examples here of initiatives that predate that being a requirement in the code. I think we've covered quite well in terms of what the organisation would look to get out of it. I just wonder if you could give us an idea of the reception that you found when you started to go out to the various elements of your structures. Was it receptive? Was it hostile? Probably too strong a word. Or was it collegiate and everybody wants to get on board? Aaron, if we go same order.
Was it positive? Skepticism, definitely, to start with. You're coming here to get rid of one of the layers that's in the governance that we've got, and you're here to capture all of our money. Because they have their own, they're autonomous, they're self-governing, even though they are linked to us, they have pots of money because of their membership that they have. So it was definitely, that's what you're coming to do, and you're getting rid of us. And it was like, well, no, we're not getting rid of you. We have no jurisdiction over your funds. It's they're your funds. And even if we did wound you up, or that's probably not within our jurisdiction to do anyway. In our laws and memorandums, the board has the power to change the boundaries of our regions, and that's about all that we have. There are some very long-standing, in any sport, and in any society, there's some really long-standing volunteers in there who think that they're going to lose their job or their volunteer job. There are some people who are clapping their hands and shaking us by the hand, said this is a long time coming, and we need to see reform at those particular levels as well. There's a lot of apathy as well, and to try to overcome that, we thanks to the investment that we got from UK Sport and Sport England, we brought in an independent consultant to help us with this, so that they were asking the right questions in the right way, and it wasn't me stood there in front of the people saying, what do you think about this, what do you think about that? So we started to turn that around slightly, that skepticism. It's still there, they still think we're out to get rid of them, but we can't, like Georgina intimated, we can't deliver the sport without them. We're not the deliverers of the sport, they are. And what we want to try and do is make sure that they're fit for purpose in terms of what they do.
So that sort of third-party objectivity can perhaps overcome certain levels of resistance, do you think, in terms of, like you say, it's not just us saying it. Here we've got somebody with no skin in the game who's looked at what's going on and they have seen X, Y, Z.
Yeah, absolutely. There's still some resistance there,
Sure,
but hopefully that's overcome over time in that they are free to say whatever they want, respond however they want, and they've got to hope that those messages that come back to us, we look at them, but we've got a responsibility then to play that back to them and say, you told us this, and therefore that's why we're going in a certain direction.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Chris, you're sort of, I take it, dealing with a sort of initially Victorian member association structure. You encountered fun and games along the way?
There have been some interesting conversations along the way, absolutely right. And I guess if I reflect on how well it's been received at this stage, the fact that we've got those 7 co-compliant counties and a whole host of it in process is a great indication of how well it's been received. I think it's partly the way it's been supported, which is a real key factor. Some of the conversations in the early days were slightly different, for sure. I can remember one former county FA chair quite irate, saying, you know, we can't do this, and, you know, all the people that have served the game for so long shouldn't have to stand down, and all the rest of it. So those kind of conversations were very much live. Listen, it's a voluntary code as well, so this is a choice. This is the counties themselves saying, we believe this is the right thing for our organisation, and we want to take those steps forward with our support. And that's a big culture piece, you know, as Lindsay spoke about. So it's a work in progress, the reception. For some, it's really warm, and we've got some real champions across the network that speak publicly. They nudge their peers down the road and say, come on, it's time you came on the journey with us. And there may be cooler ones are thawing. So I think that's probably the best way to sum it up.
That's all progress of a kind, I suppose. And Georgina, I wonder if I could get some comments from you on, obviously, you know, in undertaking a project like this, you're going out and shining a light on areas that may not have had light shined on them previously, and people who perhaps have, you know, maybe I'm painting this in an overly negative way, people who have been left unhindered to get on with what they were doing are now having people sort of poking around. Is that a reception that you found, and how did you overcome it if that was the case?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't wish to kind of repeat what my colleagues have just said, because identically you get the same kind of reaction. People don't go, oh, fantastic, this new code, you know, it's just what I've been waiting for. I think that, you know, my reflection is perhaps how have we come around it. I kind of think if we could start again, hindsight's a marvellous thing. And one of the things that we perhaps didn't spend enough time on is thinking about the historic structure and how we've got to where we've got to. So you come in with this sort of new, whatever it is, this new initiative, but what you are going into is a whole load of perceptions about the national governing body, about the structure, about who British fencing is, about who England fencing is, about their roles, all of them, you know, individuals, the skill sets of the complete variety of skill sets of people who found themselves in positions of power, and why they are there. So in a bit kind of like, you know, you would if you were going into business for different organisations, you would do a bit of a stakeholder mapping and going, right, let's have a look at these individual personalities, what are their skill sets, where are they coming from? And I think that what we could have done better is perhaps think about having a conversation maybe about the history of where we'd got to before we started about where we're going to next. So there is a perception probably amongst most people in fencing that England fencing's been around for years. Well, it hasn't. It was created 20 years ago because it was thought that this was how Sport England funding was going to be channeled through a new organisation. It was created and it wasn't fit for purpose, and British fencing is the Sport England funded body. But this kind of relationship, you know, this exposed, interesting enough, which is, you know, next steps, what do we do with England fencing? But England fencing then in turn, created the regions, but just kind of let them run free, completely run free. And so what we're coming into is very, very different, and very different. Some of them sitting on big bank accounts. I'm still sure they're sitting on big bank accounts, but of course they're like, you're not getting anywhere near it. And we're not after their money. but they don't, you know, whether they believe us or not is another thing. And then you've also got some regions crying out for help. And I think, you know, we did uncover some great people. But, yeah, I mean, with all these projects, they're all about people, aren't they? And they're all about the personalities that find themselves in leadership positions. And the other experience that we had, I mean, as well as I wished it was just apathy, was sometimes about how some of these people treated staff and the contractor that we brought into the project. So we did bring a contractor in because we thought, well, that will lessen the kind of, perhaps, you know, maybe more professional and stop them kind of seeing a member of British fencing staff as someone to have a go at because 40 years ago something happened or somebody didn't get selected for something. And I think I'll leave it at, some of the behaviours reminded me of working in big organisations back in the 90s. And then you look at the diversity, or should I say lack of diversity, and we've got a massive job to do. I think in for fencing, just in society, we sit here and there's progress being made at the top level, but what it does do is start to go, gosh, if we're really going to impact grassroots sports on the ground, we've really got to think about all these people who have, and I will say, put themselves in positions of power with very little accountability and who are responsible for delivering the sport. And culture, and we talked a lot about carrots and sticks, but yeah, so I think that's probably a summary of my reflections on that.
No, that's really useful. And obviously, when you get around to grassroots delivery, you are, at least to some degree, beholden to the goodwill of volunteers, and I guess it's that balance of, you know, harnessing that, because as you say, they are the delivery of your sport. Without them, it doesn't happen. By the same token, you know, applying consistency of standards in terms of skills and processes, those kinds of things. And I think it's quite important as well, just thinking about what you said, Georgina, that, yeah, there's certainly, maybe I've just made the mistake of assuming that you go looking and you find negative things, but equally, there's the opportunity to find things being done really well and using those as the examples to then apply to the rest of the organisation. So I think it does represent an opportunity in that respect.
And I will add to that, if I may, that you know, we did find in some great people as well.
Exactly, yeah.
So you kind of do, when you have big meetings, often the loudest voice in the room is not necessarily the most positive one. But then when you start to break down and have conversations, we found people that were like, you know what, that's a future board director. With a bit of training and a bit of support, we can bring some elements of that community. There was a particular young woman who was involved, and that's that kind of, you know, thinking with a slightly different lens, what can I get out of that project, finding people that can grow into leadership positions in the organisations for us. So that was a real positive. Yeah,
that sounds like.
To add to that, so to what we were just talking there about the delivery aspects of it, I'm the chair of a hockey club, and I'm probably, the irony is I've been there too long. I need to get out and let the club survive on its own. But England Hockey, and I know there's somebody here from England Hockey today, so I'm happy to have a chat with them later, but England Hockey have been through this process as well, where they've looked at that structure and made some changes and things like that. But 99.9% of people in the hockey club that I chair are not interested in that. They just want to turn up and play on a Saturday and make sure there's 2 umpires. And the pitch is there and everything like that. So that goes back to what this gentleman asked before in terms of, you know, as governing bodies, we're trying to bring that governance level down to make sure that the sport's being delivered in a really positive and safe way, to make sure we reduce the number of complaints we get at the top level and things like that. But we've got to still keep one eye on the fact that the sport needs to be delivered, and those people turn up to pay money to play the sport, and not forget that, you know, they're all volunteers at that really low, well, even the layer below us, you know, in terms of the governing body at the top. There's some home nations with paid staff, but, you know, but below that, they're all volunteers. So, you know, we've got to not forget that.
Exactly, yeah, and it is striking that balance, isn't it? Just incidentally, how long is too long as chair?
Oh, too long. Too long.
20 years too long?
Not quite 20
Okay.
years, but yeah,
Right,
two.
we're all right
In various roles, I need to get out. My wife wants me to get out. What role have you got this year?
Hang on, no. We're talking about from a governance perspective, not from domestic bliss perspective.
That's all that matters, Craig. I'm afraid.
I wondered if I was on the right panel for a second.
This is a therapy session.
Yeah, this is a Jerry Springer show now.
She's here.
You thought she was in. Just thinking about practical steps then, in terms of, obviously you're at varying stages of implementing these initiatives. There are organisations here and on the call who might be turning their attention to it for the first time. I wonder if we could just maybe pick out a few things sort of process-wise in terms of mapping out a project like this. And perhaps, Chris, if I could come to you, you've already been through some of your essential steps in the essay and on the webinar recently. I wonder if you could just rehearse a couple of those for us again, and obviously Aaron and Georgina can chip in with their experiences too.
Absolutely. It's a really key bit, and it reminded me the keynote, sort of the small steps, the small incremental pieces that gradually get people engaged with this and start the journey and the culture change. So that very much was part of our thinking. I won't bore you with the change equation that we speak about in the essay, but the key point was, how do we make the first bit easy? Some simple steps that will get all the counties started, those small incremental steps. So the first bit, the soft launch of the code, as we call it, we did 3 regional briefings, and then it was March 2020, and we all know what happened then, so we never got to conclude those. So at the point of launch, because of COVID, but also deliberately, we left the counties alone to digest, to read, to understand it. We thought, as a result of that, some would come forward and be really interested and engaged in it, and some did. We also knew we wouldn't have the capacity to work with 50 counties. So, if we had 4 or 5, real forward-thinking counties we could work with, that would be great, and that happened. As Linda will know, there was a whole toolkit of resources, 70 or 80 appendices that went with our code. So it's a practical guide. Counties could go away and think about an organisational challenge, go to Appendix X, and actually use it in practice. And that was a really important step too. Probably the key one for us was a self-assessment. So the counties wanted to know where they stood against the code. Even if they weren't thinking, right, this is for us this year, they wanted to know, what are our gaps? So Manchester FA, I'll give them a credit, they produced an online, an Excel document, which was a brilliant self-assessment tool. We pitched it off them and converted it into a smart sheet, which is our tool of preference. It's the one the counties use for safeguarding and other elements. So we got everybody through that process. That, by definition, created engagement, created ownership, and it created an action plan. So we got the counties moving, which was brilliant. From that, we needed a compliance framework that would work for Sport England, would be a place where we could capture evidence, and those action points from the self-assessment were pre-populated into the compliance framework. So there was a natural way that counties could keep going with those small steps. The next one was a communications plan, and that plan is still in place now 2 years on. So it's about, initially, how do we get the leadership engaged, the CEOs, the chairs, senior managers within the counties, but also wider members of the board too, senior independent directors. And now we're extending that to support for finance directors, board safeguarding champions, and gradually cascading and literally spreading the word, which is a really important tool. Bespoke training and support, so it's the role of the SGA. We tried to take on some of that. We started a fortnightly surgery and got counties to share their practice on that. We hosted it, but really it was about peer-to-peer influence and encouragement. So we're still running those. 18 months later, edition number 30 odd, and they've worked really well. And in addition to that, bespoke training, one-off sessions on conflicts of interest, a whole host of different support and training tools for the county. And then finally, a clear way of measuring progress. So we introduced the board tracker, so we could get data, the county FAs could use it, we could see the progress that was being made, and we could play back to county FAs, right, you're 30% compliant, keep going, you're now 80%, nearly there, and actually got this whole dashboard and suite of smart sheets that give us that data. So that's the whole picture, the 7 practical steps that we speak about, but it's a case of keeping going with it, really.
Yeah, and just on your behalf, before I get Aaron and Georgina's input as well, certainly there may be a misconception that you know, the organisations, like I say, thinking about this for the first time might be quite small organisations who are just going to say, well, the FA can just throw resource at this. You know, big national governing body, tons of cash, can just, you know, throw money at the problem and resource it that way. I ask a question knowing the answer. Is that the case at the FA?
Well, the scale of the grassroots game I mentioned at the start will tell you that we don't have the resource to cover all of that work. So we've launched manuals and documents before, not necessarily around governance, and put them out there, and they haven't necessarily landed. So we've made sure that this one does land, and it's been done through the existing regional manager team, primarily, a team of 4 covering the whole country. No additional budget or minimal additional budget. So yeah, we've used the existing structure, which of course, you know, will be comparatively large to others, but that's to serve as a whole game of 110,000 teams in 50 counties. So thank you for the reminder.
Yeah.
We're not pleading poverty, but
No.
we've managed to do what we've done with existing resources.
Yeah, so the point is that it's something that's been done in and around the existing structure that exists, but also your existing role that exists and the things that you're doing sort of on top of that. Georgina and Aaron, do you have any sort of input in terms of practical steps that you've taken? And again, these could be steps that have worked, perhaps you wouldn't do again if you had your time again. Any thoughts on organisations thinking of addressing this for the first time now?
Well, at the end, we're doing everything that Chris says. 7-step
Yeah.
plan, but just in a smaller way, I suppose. If we go back to how we got to this in the first place, is that we went to the board and we had a strategy day with them, and we said, look, we can do this 3 ways. You can give us the funding so that we can go out, and we've got some investment from Sport England, thank you very much. We also need to do a membership review. How do you want us to do that? These are your top strategic ambitions. How do you want us to actually deliver that? So we went in with 3 options. One was fully funded through the investment and through the NGB investment. And we brought somebody in to do it all, and we just sat back and let them do it. Then it was obviously part funded, part investment, part in terms of resource from people like myself and other colleagues. And then it was fully done internally as well, and minimal levels of investment needed. And let them decide which way we wanted to go. Obviously, there's time implications in that, in terms of we can start on a governance project, but then the next thing I do is get an email to say that there's a club conduct issue in this club in Somerset that we really need. So the day job gets in the way of being able to do that. Thankfully, the board agreed that we needed to be fully funded, and we can bring in a consultant, and not, and I don't know whether I'm allowed to, but I will. James Allen at Council has come in, and his colleague Verity, and they've done an absolute fantastic job with us. James has got background working for the SRA previously. He's done some of these projects with other NGBs. He's looking at other NGBs and going, oh, that's good. I could just take the word FA off it and replace it with Archery GB. England Hockey, as I said, did a similar, so we can look and, and obviously didn't have these contacts, but now know I hopefully can pick up Chris and say, I've got this issue, or, how do I do that? And then, honestly, we have gone through similar tasks to what Chris has outlined there, in terms of, obviously, through COVID. COVID helped us realise that we didn't need such a big staff based at Lilleshall. And and that helped me and colleagues convince the organisation and the board that we needed people out there. So we've got regional staff now, which is absolutely fantastic, because I can just go, there you go, you do it, I don't want to do that anymore. So there you go, that's for you. And that, they are now helping us have those touches with the counties and the regional associations. So that's massively helped us. We've had a couple of board champions as well, who have touched base with us outside of the board meetings, so that they can have an input and say, well, why didn't you do this, or why didn't you do that? And we can explain that. So when we're going into the board meeting, we've got those people who are standing alongside us to say, actually we agree with the way forward, and it reduces the conversation at the board level that's like, oh, why did you use that font on that board, you know, that presentation, things like that.
Oh. Thank you, Georgie. Do you have any?
Yeah, I think with our regions, we were looking at really tier 1, so we were putting in place some very simple governance, and what I would say is we didn't really kind of push governance compliance as being the lead thing we spoke about. We called it a regional review, and we talked about clarifying roles and responsibilities. And so a large piece of that work was unfortunately, I will say a big thank you to Jackie Bryson, who is in the audience, who was our consultant who came in, but Jackie worked with the 11 regions and with England Fencing to express what the roles and responsibilities of a region were. So this is something that the regions go, yeah, I recognise that, this is what I am, this is what I can buy into, and embedded in that is governance. Because a lot of governance, and I felt this coming to the sports sector and the private sector, it isn't rocket science. It's kind of the way we should be working, a lot of it. And so if you lead with perhaps more what they're interested in is, well, what is my position? You know, what are my responsibilities to England Fencing, and what are my responsibilities to British Fencing? You know, so our project probably took a very different tack, but it was, you know, we only had 10, I should get that number right, 10 regions, so there's 10 organisations, and at the time not all of them had people in a leadership position that we could work with, so I think we were mostly working with 9, and I think as it is at the moment we've got 7 signed up, and you know, but there have been challenges, and these are, and this is, governance is an ongoing thing anyway, so now we're, you know, what are the next steps for us? We need to look. The questions we're asking, some of them really got this stuff, and then they were starting to ask some really valid governance questions upwards, and those questions need to be answered. Mm-hmm. So you end up with this kind of movement. If you've got governance effective champions, but they wouldn't call themselves that, that's fine. You know, asking questions. Why isn't this like this? This should be better. This organisation that I'm supposed to be part of, what am I getting from them? And then the top-down effect, and then hopefully we kind of meet in the middle, and it'll all be wonderful, she says, but a long time coming. Yeah, so it wasn't quite what I would, you know, the approach that for example, that you have taken, but I still think that it has, it's certainly, you know, another route to embedding governance that doesn't have to lead with, you know, coming out and saying, we're going to tell you how to govern.
No, that's fantastic. And I think we're getting ready now for questions from the audience. So if anybody does have any, please raise your hand. And just while the microphone's getting there, just a very quick question, which may have a very long answer, but if we can keep it brief. What constitutes success, or what constitutes progress in an undertaking like this? Maybe if we hold that maybe for closing comments, and we'll hand over to the question from the floor, please.
Cheshire. We're one of 42 active partnerships, strategic partners to Sport England, so we don't have members, we don't directly deliver anything. So my question really is, what does cascading look like for us? What we do is distribute Sport England money at a local level to tackle inequalities and in line with the objectives of uniting the movement. The steps we put in place up to now is we do a due diligence on every applicant, so we check for financial stability, do they have a safeguarding policy, are their safeguarding certificates up to date, do they have ED&I, all those sort of things they have to go through before it will reach the application stage. Now, is that enough in terms of cascading, or should we be offering, for example, training sessions to potential applicants to say this is what good governance looks like, and if so, is the support available to us to present that training session?
Anyone wants to take that?
I don't mind jumping in there.
Please.
Maybe not the detail, but Sport England hosted with their first System Partners Connection event yesterday, was it? Oh, the days are merging into one, sorry. I think it was yesterday. And part of the conversation, there was NGBs, active partnerships, other bodies on there. Part of the conversation we had, it was a little speed dating thing. Part of the conversation really was that we're all system partners. We're all being invested by the same organisation. So my thought was, and the conversation we had yesterday was that we've each got a job to do as a system partner, and if you're working with potentially some of our archery clubs, then you can help us make sure that those governance systems are in place as well. We've spent the last few years moving away from as an NGB, moving away from organisations like Active Partnerships because of what we had to do and where we had to go. But now we've got an opportunity to come back together to say, well, if you're working with that particular archery club and you've got them delivering a specific project and we've not been able to get into that club for various reasons because something happened 20 years ago and everybody, you know, etc., then surely that's hopefully going to be a good outcome for both of us and also the archery club as well. In terms of the other part of the question, I don't know, maybe my...
Yeah, just thinking about our context with that cascading piece. Obviously, we're cascading out to 50 county FAs, and you would think that would then cover the whole game, but then we go, what about the clubs? You know, with 22,000 clubs, 110,000 teams. So actually getting the principles out far and wide, which I think is what you're speaking about, is a challenge. I think we're still working through that, but we've got various initiatives with the club side, and we've got some clubs 100 teams plus. You know, so when we work with them via the counties, it's how can we utilise some of the principles of good governance that come through the code? How can we translate that into the support that we're providing, you know, to you as a club, as opposed to a county? So I think it's thinking through that context of what you're doing and applying those principles as best you can. But the detail of that, I think we're all still working through as we cascade farther and wider.
Yeah. Yep.
Hi, I'm Steph from Pentathlon GB. My question is a little bit more advice seeking. This is something that's really pertinent to us at the moment, and we're very much looking to put a lot more focus onto our regions in the coming months. We, like a lot of people in this room, are very much lacking workforce power in terms of personnel and the day job getting in the way. So my question is really, in terms of, from your experience, would your recommendations of doing this be tackle all your regions at once, get everybody in the same place and muddle through together, or do you tackle one region, learn from them, and then kind of filter it down that way? So kind of practically, what would you say is actually the best way to deliver it?
Sounds like a great question. Any? Yeah, please.
Yes, I mean, probably alluded to it a little bit earlier on. It's a massive challenge, and actually the capacity internally to do it is a big point, but also, you know, expecting people's attention and focus to be on this, you know, across all the regions is probably unrealistic. So actually I would recommend get some progress somewhere, you know, work with some of those early adopters, and actually some of those resistant people, quite frankly, we left alone, and we'll pick them up later, you know, and come back to those challenges. But there are plenty of people that would say, right, can you help us? Actually some of those early case studies and some of that early good practice you'll then be able to share across your region. So definitely that's worked for us.
But they talk. People talk. So if you deliver something to one particular county or region in the southwest, somebody in the northeast will ring you the next day and go, I heard this last night. And completely different, you know, Chinese whispers magnified 1,000 times. So I think we haven't delivered anything in isolation. We've delivered it to everybody, but we possibly will look for those people who, or organisations where we can deliver something tangible quite quickly and get that kind of champion, so to speak. But yeah, just remember, yeah, people talk. So don't hide it, but just say you're going to, you know, potentially do it in this area and we'll come to you next. And you might find that there'll be areas that want to do it straight away.
And I come in, you may well find yourself coming across some of the people that we worked with, because obviously fencing and as in pentathlon. But I go back to my earlier point. I really would arm yourself with you know, some stakeholder mapping. Find out as much as possible about the people that you're going to speak to, where their regions came from, the history. Because if you don't know that and you walk into the space, you will be dealing with a whole load of other emotions and energy that you won't understand where it's come from. And I think we perceive that as a reaction against governance, but it's not. You know, as they said, it's probably, selection will be in there somewhere for sure, or somebody didn't get funding years ago. But that would be my advice, and then possibly wait after do that mapping first, and then make the decision and say, well, look, do we have a group of people here that actually we can work with these guys, or maybe there are people that we choose to take later. But I would absolutely agree to your point. whatever you do, don't only go with one person and don't tell the others, because they will then that whole secret project thing. So you tell everyone what you're doing, and I think people, you know, this idea, people know that small national governing bodies, you know, we don't have huge resources to say, like, we're going to start and, you know, do a couple of regions that want to step at the right, because also the nice thing is at the right time for you. This isn't mandatory, and if you don't have a drop dead, you must do this by this date. You have, to some extent, the flexibility and luxury of then, you know, picking them off gradually.
Just to add a quick point as well, as I was thinking about, you know, the answers. A different question is not when do you see yourself being co-compliant, but what are some of your challenges as an organisation, and actually unpicking some of those. And to coin the phrase, all roads lead back to governance, not to upset the Royal Tourist Board, again, as we did on the webinar. You can often trace it back to an issue, you know, that maybe exists somewhere in the structure or the people or the communications part of the code. So having those sorts of conversations, and it's not this, right, let's shine a light on your governance. What are your challenges and how can we help?
That's brilliant. We're running a couple of minutes over, but we've got just one final question at the back, please.
Hi, thanks. Claire Coleman from Swim England. We're about to embark on a very similar counties project. I just want to know from the panel, through that consultation work that you did with your stakeholders, were there any conversations around clarifying the purpose of the county/regional organisations that then helped you push forward and cascade the good governance, or was that already a sorted question as such before you got there? I'd just be interested to get some reflections on that.
I'll go first. Yeah, so we started our project in COVID, so we were initially online, trying to talk to people, inviting people in, talking to them. We did some road shows earlier on this year, once we could get out there and people were more comfortable coming to talk to us. And at each of those, we asked them what they thought, their counties and their regions, their main responsibilities are. And look, if we look at the whole of archery and all the organisations in archery, they probably 99% meet the requirements that we're talking about. I forget tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. I forget which one we are, but whichever tier they are, they probably meet all that. They've got a constitution, they've got a bank account and things like that. But it is that culture aspect of it that's been mentioned already today. But it's also, you know, that organisation was set up in 1727 or whenever it was, and have they looked at their constitution? Have they looked at what are they delivering back? You know, we've been looking at membership fees as well in terms of, you know, who charges what. Our Northern Counties Society charges a junior 20p a year, but in the Southwest you're paying £6. So what are you getting back? What are you getting for 20p and what are you getting for £6? And when we did all those road shows, again, the slight apathy, we only had probably against 7 road shows, we probably had less than 200 people there. But everybody said a county association responsibility is coaching and competition. And then just stopped that. And it was like, right, okay, are you sure? Nothing else. Obviously, there are other things we want them to do. That they're heavily invested in our disciplinary procedures. If it goes wrong at the club, you don't come straight to the governing body. You've got to go to the county and the region and exhaust that whole thing before you end up coming at that. But yeah, so we're at that stage now where we've got to go back and play that back to the county and the region associations and say, right, what do you think about this? And how are we going to move this forward? And as I said before, they probably think we're going to say, we're taking you out of the system. Where we're not. We're trying to get them to play back to their members for that 20p or that £6, whatever it is. This is what you're getting in return.
That's great. So I hope everybody doesn't mind us just going a few minutes over. If we could just have final question, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Andy Taylor from Active Partnerships. It's more of a question for you probably, Craig. We talked about the system partners convening, coming together. We've heard from a lot of different national governing bodies and different partners in the room. But where we certainly see the opportunity is actually convening on a local or regional level with a focus around governance. Not necessarily the FA doing that bit here, Archery doing that bit here, Active Partnerships doing that bit here, but actually getting a variety of people in that room to share that practice, because everyone has different resources and capacity and everything else. are there plans for that type of thing in the future, and can there be, I suppose, because I think once you get different organisations in the room, that helps to cascade, that helps to build that momentum and that movement that which we want.
So what are the plans for what?
To convene on a local, regional level. We've done this on a national level, obviously, but if you look at from a regional perspective, different national governing bodies have different capacity, as an example, but getting those other organisations in a room to help take people on the journey, I think could be really important.
Yeah, no reason why not. I mean, now that we're sort of freed from the constraints we've been under for the last few years, we can get out and about a bit more. So even if it's a case of taking some of our sort of the SGA networking events around the country, that opens it up to different types of organisations, we're probably going to alter the emphasis of the SGA from what it has been to date, which is with a clear emphasis on the tier 2, tier 3 organisations, and looking at how we support, you know, much smaller bodies, much smaller organisations. And I think what we'll work out is which bit of that is done by the SGA and which bit is done by organisations that already have a presence at that sort of level of the pyramid. So certainly, yeah, we can look to either deliver ourselves or work in partnership with those who can. So happy to help, definitely where we can.